Welcome to the Money Insights Podcast, where high-income earners come to learn wealth-building strategies that will take them from high income to high net worth. With your hosts, financial and wealth-building experts, Christian Allen and Rod Zabriskie.
Welcome into another episode of the Money Insights Podcast. My name's Christian Allen. I'm here with Rod the Pod Zabriskie. Rod, what's up, man?
Hey, I am doing great. And you know what this time of year means?
It means college football's coming up. Is that what you're going to say?
I mean, I like that you assumed that, but I was thinking about school.
Oh, no, you weren't. No, you weren't.
It's
Rod.
true.
We know you love
I can't
college
not
football.
think about college football.
Can I just say, it feels like it was like a few weeks ago that you were excited about college football. So I guess that's been a full year.
And now we're here.
Oh, okay. You could have brought it up then, I guess. Well, anyway, I'm very excited for you, Rod. I'm also a college football fan, but I used to be like way more diehard than I am today. Maybe not way more, but at least a little more diehard than I am today. It's a fun time though because you also get good weather. So,
right,
especially if you're in Utah, right?
It's not to love. Yeah.
Everybody loves spring and fall and summer. Everybody hates winter and summer because they're so extreme. Anyway, that's the way it goes. Okay, Rod, typically, would you say that we tend to teach principles? Is that fair to say that we're focused on teaching principles in general? Okay,
yep.
So we believe in principles, like that we're absolutely principle followers, right? We talk about the whole formula being leverage, velocity, cash flow, tax optimization, and so on. I won't go through it. Today, we're going to flip the script, Rod. The episode title is The Wealth Builder's Playbook, When to Break Your Own Rules. So, okay, we always are talking about the rules that we have to live by to build massive wealth. And now we're going to tell you to break the rules. You ready for this?
How dare we?
Okay, but here's the thing. Here's the caveat. This is what I hadn't told you. Remember how I talked about how much we love principles?
Mm-hmm.
We are going to break the rules based on principles.
Okay, now that's what I like to hear. And this is probably not going to be a surprise to people because, for example, a few weeks ago when we talked about the Ramsey effect and some of the rules, some of the restrictive things that he and others like him impose on people as if adhere to these things and it'll take you to the promised land. Don't do anything
gospel
different. And we're telling
this is the way to do it. It doesn't matter the situation. The principle, the law is what drives the day.
Yeah. And we were telling people why, okay, let's actually get to the real principles that are really helpful in that and extricate ourselves away from the overly structured nature of those rules, right?
Yeah, I think this is a good throwback. So we are staying consistent that we like and we believe in principles. They're core principles that we need to lock in on in order to build wealth. Like they're just proven. We know that they work, right?
Yep.
And yet there's also times when it makes sense to break our rules. And so today we're going to create some kind of like construction, organization, some thought process around when I should actually take the chance and break my own rules. Okay. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
And you might even learn a few new words. I know I did. Okay. I'm excited about this one. At least one new word that I was like, I haven't really, and maybe I'm just going to like show myself as not very educated. People are going to be like, where's Christian been? Everybody knows that word. But I'll just tell you that I didn't know what it meant. And we'll get to that in a minute. Okay.
All right,
before we get into that, Rod, I want to just make sure we emphasize why the rules exist. So if I were to ask you, okay, why do we have rules at all? Like, what would you tell me?
I mean, getting back to the word principle, right? We need principles to guide us in what we do, right? Because without them, and we're just operating on whim or impulse or a good story that someone's telling me, and I get away from those principles, well, then I can just really make a lot of dumb mistakes. right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so where do the principles come from? A lot of times they come from, oh, I made this mistake before. I don't want to make that mistake again. So I'm going to build some guardrails around what I'm doing based on those principles, just to make sure I'm not making dumb mistakes again.
Yeah. So I would say that principles create scalability, right?
Okay. Yeah. I
It's
like that.
really difficult to scale luck
Mhm.
or even good intuition.
Mhm.
But if I want to build wealth, there are principles that I know are scalable that are duplicatable. I can do over and over again to build what I want. So scalability is a big part of it. And I also think, Rod, there are reasons, maybe a lot of reasons, why we should consider breaking those very own principles, but we have to do it with intention. That's like that's the word out there, right? Like intentionality. We have to make sure that we're not just doing it on a whim. We have some sort of thought process behind those moments in time when I feel like, okay, it makes sense for me to go out of bounds of my typical rule following and take a risk on something for XYZ reason. Okay.
So if I go outside the guardrails, I want to have guardrails around when and why and how I do that.
Yes, exactly. Now, I'll be honest, like this is hard for me. Like let's be clear. I'm not good at this. I have principles that I definitely live by, but when I decide to go outside of those, I don't know that I typically have created these principles around. I didn't create the guardrails around the guardrails, right?
Okay.
But I do believe, as I've been through this process or thinking through this, like it does make sense to create an intentional flow into those moments when I say, hey, this is worth breaking my own rules on. And that's kind of we don't need to get too complex on the details and the philosophy behind this.
Yeah.
The focus is really about, we know that it's important to have principles that we're living by, but we also are smart enough to realize that there's times and situations where we should break them. In fact, Rod, this goes back to my favorite saying, who's the boss? Situation.
The situation is the boss.
The situation is the boss. Okay, so we're going to talk about some situations, some opportunities where we might say, hey, to heck with my rules, I'm going in right now. Okay?
All right.
So the first one, and this is one that we pretty commonly talk about. So this one I think most people will get, but talk to us, Rod, about asymmetric risk and why that would be one of the 6 times on our list that we might consider breaking our own rules.
Yeah. Well, so this is basically a situation where if you win so big that it's worth taking on that risk with a very small portion of your net worth, right? You're not putting it all on the table. You're saying, okay, the odds are good enough. Like I feel good enough about my chances of being successful. And if it is successful, the benefits are just going to be like life-changing, disproportionate to the level of risk, that it's worth it.
So you're saying, Rod, things like the dinar, that would be a great example. Something that everyone should go all in on. Asymmetric risk. It could be life-changing. And, I only have to put a few $1,000 in it.
If that works out, then yes.
then it would fit inside. Okay, but don't do that. Don't do that. That was obviously a sarcastic example. We don't want anybody investing in the dinar. Okay, so, but this one that we commonly talk about, like as investors, we're always looking for upside opportunity. And when we can look at it and feel like there's a clear exponential opportunity without significant risk, that's what we're talking about. In those situations, I might decide to go outside of my typical parameters to do something different that, again, creates asymmetric risk, more opportunity than I'm taking in risk. Okay, so that's the first one. It's the first principle. Okay, Rod, this is the word I didn't really know. So again, maybe I'm showing my ignorance here, but convexity. What the heck? So first of all, Rod, did you know what convexity meant going in? You probably did.
Do not know what it means in this context. So
okay. Well, we're going to learn about what convexity is because according to Jarvis, this is very much a principle that we should be using. And when it was described to me, I totally agreed. So that's kind of the issue here. It's when you have enough small momentous triggers that are, and this sounds a lot like asymmetric risk in some ways, but you have to think of it more in like action items instead. So in my mind, I'll give you an example where this is hard. I feel almost like something like Bitcoin could fit into this, in the sense that you've got a lot of many triggers inside like the Bitcoin space that are pushing toward positive gains, right? So when you have a lot of these things that are creating momentum, that would be what we're talking about in this situation. We're using those opportunities where we can see that there's just so many triggers that are in its favor that I might make sense of saying, hey, I wouldn't invest in this for whatever reason, but because I have all of these like really clear indicators, positive triggers, that would be the reason that I would actually do it. Is that making sense to you?
It almost feels like maybe it's a category of asymmetric risk. You know what I mean? Like the disproportionate upside exists, but it's more specific. It's like these chain of events are happening that are leading to something that you normally wouldn't associate that with an asymmetric risk. But because of the chain of events, it's now putting it in that category. Kind of like that.
Okay, yeah, I can go with that. So one of the examples we have is buying undervalued real estate in a neighborhood that's like on the verge of transformation. Now, that again, you could look at it as a form of asymmetric risk. So there's a lot of similarities. But again, I think what they're looking at least for me, that delineation was in like the number of momentum building things that are happening in its favor. That's kind of where my head goes at. Okay. Yeah. We're going to leave that one by. The next one, Rod, is forced advantage. We will be willing when we're looking at a situation where we're taking part in forced advantage. Do you know what that means?
I see the outline, so now I know what it means.
Okay. Well, what is the outline telling? What are you getting from it? When you hear that, what do you get?
I think about stuff like, this is going to be a really bad example, but when Tesla dealerships are being attacked and cars are being burned and the value of the stock goes down, but there's probably a good reason to think that it's going to come back.
Okay. That's an interesting example.
It's not something you could ever have predicted, but it's like just time sensitive. Like it's happening right now, and maybe creating an opportunity to buy.
Okay. So the definition is basically like that there's rare time sensitive factors that are stacking the odds heavily in our favor, right? So there's you could apply these principles to a lot of different investments, but this one's more about the timing element. That's what I'm getting, right? We're focused on because of the timing of a situation. Okay, so I'll give a couple of examples that I think probably fit this. Right before the pandemic kind of went into full swing, I bought a bunch of stock that I thought would be favorable in the circumstances where people weren't connecting as much. And I'm one of many people that did this. But by doing that, the portfolio, it's fluctuated a lot since then. But in the time that I bought it, like 3 months later, it had more than doubled, just because a lot of those places, for example, Zoom was great. Yeah. Slack was great. The day, what am I trying to think of? I can't think of the name of it. Anyway, one of a lot of these like tools that are connecting people that maybe they just seemed like extras suddenly became like really necessary, teledoc type stuff. I didn't go teledoc, but I went on another one that did really well. Like, so anyway, those are kinds of situations where you might say, okay, the timing of this just feels like it makes sense to do it. Again, I go back to Bitcoin, but Bitcoin dropped to 79 like 4 months ago, and it had a high of like 123. And if you believe in the long-term viability of Bitcoin, then buying in a situation like that could certainly be something that's qualified as kind of using that forced advantage, right? I'm taking the advantageous timing of what's going on. I'm using that to my benefit. And
So
again,
I have a
you could
question
probably
then.
think of a lot of ways that this could fit. Yeah.
So why is that breaking the rule? If
Why is it breaking
one of my principles is to be
rule?
opportunistic and be looking for stuff like that?
Why is it breaking the rule? I think what's really happening here is we're saying typically people go in. Now, this is a little bit different because you have investors in very different profiles, right? So we're speaking to this large group of people. And I think that when you're all in on the alternative investment side, these are probably already just your typical thoughts, right? A lot of these things are just the things we're thinking about and actively want to be doing. So I think of it as going outside of like, okay, let's say that I have a few assets that I like. Maybe even as a real estate investor, I typically go in multifamily. That's been my bread and butter.
Yeah.
It could be, how does that fit here? It could be like, but this opportunity over here has these other things that are just really going well that maybe takes me out of my lane, but gives me what I believe it to be a real an opportunity. So it doesn't necessarily mean like for somebody this wouldn't be like for somebody this could be like a core focus, right? That could be a core element of their overall investment strategy, but it could be used in a lot of different ways. And like, I think the way that I just threw out there probably makes the most sense, right? Maybe I have like focused things that I typically invest in, and this pushes me into doing some things that maybe I'm less comfortable or familiar with, but because there's these advantages, I'm going to take it.
Yeah.
Whereas I would always do that inside of my own multifamily space. Like that's just obvious,
Yep. Makes sense.
Okay. Good thought, Rod. Because I think some of these I think a lot of these fit into that category. Okay. So the next one is strategic leverage. This one, just the same thing we talk about all the time. So for us, this is actually one of our core principles is using leverage wisely. We talk about conservative leverage. And so strategic or conservative leverage is really what we're focused on here. And we probably don't need to talk a lot about it because we talk about it all the time. It's how we create exponential growth in our investments. It's a big part of why the alternative investment space gives you significant advantages that you can't get typically in the traditional world, if only because we're multiplying our returns, our tax benefits, our, the value that we're getting through leverage. We should just kind of be making that. But again, you could look at that and maybe jump from one class to another, depending on, it could feel that same kind of concept that forced advantages where I go outside of my lane. Maybe I go into more leverage than I'm typically comfortable with because I think the situation makes sense for it. But overall, really in this, we're talking about just doing what you do. Buy your real estate using the bank's money, right? That's the focus point. Or whatever else you're buying.
And by extension, you could say leveraging relationships or partnership opportunities, but getting into things that you wouldn't take on your own, but because of the expertise that the partner brings, it just makes sense.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. So that's a really good point. So, and I was thinking of it only in like the money sense, right? But you're absolutely right. The example that we have here is partnering on a deal where, partnering with like a proven operator to scale an investment you wouldn't necessarily take on alone. And I think that's one of those that a lot of successful people do, right? Like that's an early stage. How do I get from here to there? That's a really great way to get there. And again, why is it an exception? Because maybe it's a bigger project than I would typically take on, but now I'm dipping into this principle, strategic leverage, to do something that I wouldn't typically do otherwise.
Yep, I like it.
Okay, Rod, we talk about non-correlation we talk about non-correlating assets. What does non-correlation opportunity mean in the context of the Wealth Builders Playbook and when you should break your own rules?
Yeah, so if I've been working within my rule book and that has disproportionately pushed me toward one or more asset classes just because they've been so successful, right?
Yeah.
Then I need to start looking at other asset classes that are not correlated or are not driven by the same principles, economic factors, etc., so that I can balance what I've already done. Right? They aren't categories I was originally looking at or would be interested in, but I'm kind of forced into that just because of the success of the things that I've already invested in.
Yeah, this one is interesting because like it kind of like I like to talk about, we obviously talk about the importance of diversifying, but in the same breath, I'm always talking about the importance of not diversifying just for the sake of diversifying, like diversify with intention, right?
Yeah.
Like in a smart way. And when I look at this is kind of what I see, right? Like I think that this one, okay, a couple of things. One, I think that it is always important to have some assets that aren't correlating, right? Mostly as a hedge, as a, for downside risk and things like that. But here I'm thinking about it more as, from an opportunity standpoint, right? Like I might have so for example, we oftentimes talk about high cash value life insurance as an uncorrelated asset. Really, it could be uncorrelated to just about any volatile asset, right? Because it's so steady. The other, it's always going to be considered that. But let's just say it was the market, right? Here we're thinking about, okay, if I carry most of my money in the alternative space, or I carry most of my money in the market, it would just be wise and within our principles to have some stuff that's not correlated. But here, what we're talking about is taking, I think, at least in my mind, it's about breaking those typical rules. If our rules typically include some non-correlation, now we're breaking it not for the purpose as much of hedging, but for the opportunity that I could create, right? Because maybe we know something about what's happening, or we're seeing a trend in the market and we're saying, okay, there's additional opportunity by going into an uncorrelated asset than what I typically would. That's going to create, again, it's going to create asymmetric risk, that kind of thing. At least that's the idea that's coming in my mind as I think about this as kind of a core principle.
Makes sense.
Okay, Rob, we're going to finish with one more. I said 6. I think there's 7. Irreversible advantage. What does that even mean? You're like, I'm learning about it on the fly. So but tell us what you mean. Tell us what you think about it.
Yeah, well, sometimes there are things that come along that creates an advantage, not just for now, not just like with the example you gave on COVID. We knew COVID wasn't going to last forever. If it had lasted forever, then your category of
would have been awesome. Would have been crazy.
Into this category, because if we're never going to get back to a place where we get back together and can socialize and be in person, then the digital world takes over and permanently is in place. So that's basically what this is saying, is if there are things that are happening that permanently lock in a long-term advantage, then that's where this irreversible advantage kind of comes into place.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go back to the idea of like partnering with someone. Let's just say theoretically you had an opportunity to lock in a percentage of a company that you just wouldn't typically have that opportunity to do, and you're taking it, and maybe you're already an investor in small businesses, startup businesses, right? But here maybe you go outside of your norm, your principles, because you're getting some sort of benefit that is literally irreversible. When I think about it, I think about Mr. Wonderful. He loves himself, his royalties, right? If he can make a deal with the royalty, that's irreversible. He's going to get that thing forever, right?
Yeah.
That's why he loves them so much. So something like that, I think, fits into this idea of looking for opportunities where we're getting this irreversible advantage.
Another example that comes to mind would be like a regulatory thing. If regulation is changing and basically locking in some sort of way that we're just going to exist until
you're going to get grandfathered by doing XYZ. You know that things that the tax law is changing, but it's okay for at least up until this, and then you're going to be grandfathered in. That could be a situation where you'd say like, okay, I might go outside of the typical investment flow to go more toward whatever that is. I think that's a really good thought. And by the way, we've seen a lot of those over the years. Like I can think of several inside the insurance industry alone that kind of played inside that category where you would have wanted to do it early. And then by doing it, you locked in like the very long-term advantages that they purposefully decided to get rid of. You know what I mean? So interesting one. Okay, Rod, before we sign off, I want to talk about a couple of things. I want to make sure that we hit on, this is super important. Obviously, we've been hitting on principles and making sure we're living by our wealth building principles, but we're also breaking our rules based on principles. Let's talk about the risks of breaking rules and make sure that we don't end up down the slippery slope that is rule breaking. So where would you start?
If it works.
That's a good start, right? If it works, then you might be like, okay. But yeah, you're saying if it works, we could get enamored by it, right?
Yeah. Start thinking that's what, and when we were first kind of talking about, especially like the asymmetric risk, and I was thinking to myself, well, it kind of sounds like gambling. Well, if you gamble and you're very successful right off the bat, well then, man, you just feel like, hey, I've got this. I'm just gonna do this every day.
I'm gonna keep
Let's
rolling.
just do this every day.
Yeah, it's easy. Yeah, all I have to do is this, and this is what happens. Like, and you start believing. So, like, brings to the next one. Like, you start to believe it's you. You're the smart one. You're suddenly overconfident, and now you're potentially going way too far outside of your principled zone.
Yep.
We can't have that.
Yeah. So don't get overly confident just because. Well, just remember why you did it in the first place, right? You broke your rules because of these different opportunities that could have presented themselves, the things we just talked about. And remember that, right? Is that same opportunity coming up again and again and again? Well, probably not.
Okay, that's a good one. So again, you're saying one of the things you need to be thinking about is what's the basis of that? If you had that, if it was in, like, if there was intention and logic and thought behind it initially, then it's great. And if that same opportunity is repeating itself, then perhaps it's worth it. But to your point, more often than not, it's not. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been a great opportunity to begin with.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
That kind of thing.
Yep.
I think the biggest thing is just just overconfidence. That's the risk you run into. And even though, like, logically, we know it's not us that is, making these brilliant, amazing decisions that are just, it can be easy it can be easy to sway ourselves into more of that. And I am absolutely guilty of this myself. I've thought that I was an awesome investor at times, and I've thought I'm a terrible investor at times. The good news is we win a lot more than we lose, but I also have seen people go all in on things and have it be really problematic for them, right? So just because we talk about like the doomsdayers that love gold, right? Just because there are elements of the world that don't look as promising as we'd like, we probably don't want to get that far. And so that's the risk of rule breaking, is that we get overextended, that we get a little too extreme, We decide that we are smarter than, the markets, those types of things. And anyway, so long story short, there are absolutely reasons that it makes sense to break rules. But again, just be thoughtful about that. And I think that alone will keep us ahead of 95% of investors out there who aren't doing it with intention. They're just kind of taking it as it comes. You know what I mean?
Yep, for sure.
Okay, so what do you need to do? You have to build your own exception playbook. How do I do it? This is what we're suggesting. First, identify top 5 non-negotiable rules. Could be 6, right? Maybe we should say 6, and those could be the invest with benefits. What am I looking for? Principles. So that's the starting point. I'm finding out, or I'm trying to determine, what are those things that I absolutely believe in and have to live by. Okay, that's the start. And then from that, I can break it down and look and say, okay, are there specific situations that I can think through that would make sense to break these core rules that I'm living by? And that way you're just being thoughtful. You then define the exception using those exact principles. And Rod, this is important, you actually should document it, right? Because my experience, and maybe most of you listening are just are brighter than me, but my experience is that if I don't document it, it can get a little fuzzy. Even if it's a year or 2 or 3 down the road, suddenly, man, I'm just thinking about all the things, Rod, we go back and forth on just earlier today. And I was like, I thought this from a year ago. I thought this. And you're like, actually, it was this. Anyway, long story short, if you're like me, we're going to forget things. And so you just got to make sure you document in order to realistically believe that you're going to live by the principles. That's kind of my thought on it.
To clear the record, it's usually the other way around. It's usually me saying, oh, wait, I thought it was something different. And you're like, well, actually, no, let's go look at this.
Okay. Well, that's the irony. For years and years, Rod, I was like, man, I remember everything. If you think back, the first couple hundred meetings we did together, I feel like I know those back and forth. And then all of a sudden I turned 35. I don't know what it was. And it started to just fade a little bit. I still remember a lot of details, but I'm surprised at how many bigger picture items are sometimes a little fuzzier than I think. So anyway, my guess is that most of you are busy and are doing a lot of things and have a lot on your plate. And I probably don't have to hit this point too hard. My guess is that most people listening to our pod are already believers in documenting the things that they believe in. Okay. Core takeaway, Rod? What's your core takeaway?
The core takeaway is that the situation is the boss.
The situation is the boss.
With
it really is. How often is the situation the boss? Always, right? It's wild. Okay. I was reading an article the other day and I was like, they're just saying the situation is the boss. That's the whole article. That's the whole thing. They could just write situation is the boss by Andy Schmoberg. And that would have done it. Anyway. Okay. I think that's a good message. Thanks everybody for hanging out with us. Hopefully you learned something. We did. I had to learn what convexity meant, Rod.
Yeah.
Convexity.
Now we're going to remember forever.
Okay, thanks everyone. We'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Money Insights podcast. To learn more about the financial and business strategies discussed in this show, please visit moneyinsights.net. The views and opinions expressed on the Money Insights podcast are not intended to be individual financial, tax, or legal advice. Always consult with the appropriate advisor before making financial decisions. And if you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This will help others find the show and learn wealth-building strategies for themselves. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.